And now, a passage from Dutch New York, from Chapter 1, Settlement and Early Conditions of New Netherland. The history of the early voyages and settlements of the Dutch is told by a writer during Minuit's directorship of the new colony. He says, "This country, or the river Montagne, called by ours Mauritius, was first sailed to by the worthy Hendrik Christiansen van Cleef. It so happened that he and the worthy Adrian Block chartered a ship with the skipper Reiser, and accomplished his voyage thither, bringing back with him 2 sons of the principal sachems there. Hudson, the famous English pilot, had been there also to reach the South Sea, but found no passage. This aforesaid Hendrik Christians, after he had dissolved partnership with Adrian Block, made 10 voyages thither, in virtue of a grant from the Lords Estates, who gave him that privilege for the first establishment of the place. On the expiration of that privilege, this country was granted to the West India Company to draw their profits thence. The West India Company, being chartered to navigate these rivers, did not neglect to do so, but equipped in the spring of 1623 a vessel of 130 lasts, called the New Netherland, with 30 families, mostly Walloons, to plant a colony there. They sailed in the beginning of March, and directing their course by the Canary Islands, steered towards the wild coast, and gained the west wind, which luckily took them in the beginning of May into the river called first Rio de Montañas, now the river Mauritius, lying in 40½ degrees. The ship sailed up to the Maikens, 44 miles, near which they built and completed a fort named Orange, with 4 bastions on an island by them called Castle Island. They forthwith put the spade in the ground and began to plant, and before the mackerel sailed, the grain was nearly as high as a man, so that they are bravely advanced. They also placed a fort named Wilhelmus on Prince's Island, heretofore called Murderer's Island. It is open in front and has a curtain in the rear, and is garrisoned by 16 men for the defense of the river below. On leaving there, the course lies for the west wind, and having got it to the Bermudas, and so along the channel in a short time towards Patria. The yacht, the Mackerel, sailed out last year on the 16th June, and arrived yonder on the 12th of December. The fur and other trade belongs to the West India Company, others being forbidden to trade there. Rich beavers, otters, martens, and foxes are found there. This cargo consists of 500 otter skins and 1,500 beavers, and a few other things which were in 4 parcels of 28,000 some hundred guilders. On January 9th, 1626, Peter Minuit sailed in the Sea Mew, Captain Adrian Joris, and arrived at Manhattan on May 4th. The next ship sent out by the West India Company was the Arms of Amsterdam, which arrived on July 27th, 1626. And started on her return voyage on September 23rd, 1626, with a valuable cargo of furs and wood under charge of Peter Berenson, the Indian trader. She arrived in Amsterdam on November 4th, and on the following day, the secretary thus informed the States General. There arrived here yesterday the ship called the Arms of Amsterdam, which sailed from the river Mauritius, the Hudson, in New Netherland on the 23rd of September. Report is brought that our people there are diligent and live peaceably. Their wives have also borne them children. They have purchased the island of Manhattis from the Indians for the sum of 60 guilders. It contains 11,000 morgens of land. They have sown all kinds of grain in the middle of May, and reaped in the middle of August. I send you some samples of the summer grains as wheat, rye, barley, oats, buckwheat, canary seed, beans, and flax. The cargo of the ship consists of 7,246 skins of beaver, 853 otter, 81 mink, 36 cat lynx, 34 small rat, together with a considerable quantity of oak timber and nutwood. Our historian continues, the company there administers justice in criminal matters as far as imposing fines, boetstraf, but not as far as capital punishment. Should it happen that anyone deserves that, he must be sent to Holland with his sentence. Cornelis Hoorn was in the year 1624 the first director there. Willem van Hulst was the second in the year 1625. He returns now. Respecting these colonies, they have already a prosperous beginning, and the hope is that they will not fall through, provided they be zealously sustained, not only in that place but in the South River. For their increase and prosperous advancement, it is highly necessary that those sent out be first of all well provided with means both of support and defense, and that being free men, they be settled there on a free tenure. that they all work for, and gain be theirs to dispose of, and to sell according to their pleasure, that whoever is placed over them as commander act as their father, not as their executioner, leading them with a gentle hand. In the year 1628, there already resided on the island of the Manhatties 270 souls, men, women, and children, under Governor Minuit, Verhulst's successor, living there in peace with the natives. But as the land, in many places being full of weeds and wild productions, could not be properly cultivated in consequence of the scantiness of the population, the said Lords Directors of the West India Company, the better to people their lands, and to bring the country to produce more abundantly, resolved to grant diverse privileges, freedoms, and exemptions to all patroons, masters, or individuals who should plant any colonies or cattle in New Netherland. After Minuit purchased the island of Manhattan, no time was lost in providing for the security of the settlement. The engineer Krijn Friedrich staked out a fort on the southern point of the island, to which the name Fort Amsterdam was given. The company's counting house was a stone building with a thatched roof, but the other houses were of wood. Director Minuit and the Opperkoopman de Rasiers lived together, and there with about 30 houses on the east side of the river. Francis Molmaker began to build a horse mill with a large room above to be used as a meeting place for religious services. For although there was as yet no regular clergyman, 2 comforters of the sick, Krank Besokers, Sebastian Jansen Krol, and Jan Hoytsch, read the Bible and held meetings on Sundays. Another officer of the colony was John Lempo, the Schout, or sheriff. Each colonist had his own farm on the company's land, and was supplied with cows, but the milk was for his own profit. These temporary homes were outside the fort, but as soon as that should be completed, the people intended to reside within its walls for the sake of greater security. 2 years later, when the 3 kings, Captain John Jacobson, and the arms of Amsterdam, Captain Adrian Joris, were sent by Director Minuit to the West India Company, arriving in Amsterdam in October 1628 with furs and timber, they brought the good news that Fort Amsterdam was completed with 4 bastions and faced with stone, that the colony numbered 270 souls, including men, women, and children, that the cattle throve well, and that everything seemed prosperous. At this period, the colonists supported themselves chiefly by farming, and any deficiencies were supplied by the West India Company. During Minuit's administration, Staten Island was also purchased. The letter of Jonas Michaelius, 1628, gives a good picture of the infant colony and the difficulties the early settlers had to face. As to what concerns myself and my household, I find myself by the loss of my good and helping partner very much hindered and distressed, for my 2 little daughters are yet small. Maidservants are not here to be had, at least none whom they advise me to take, and the Angola slaves are thievish, lazy, and useless trash. The young man whom I took with me I discharged after Whitsuntide, for the reason that I could not employ him out of doors at any working of the land, and indoors he was a burden to me instead of an assistance. He is now elsewhere at service with the Boers. The promise which the Lords Master of the Company had made me to make myself a home instead of a free table which otherwise belonged to me is wholly of no avail. For their honours well know that there are no houses, cows, nor labourers to be obtained here for money. The country yields many good things for the support of life, but they are all to be gathered in an uncultivated and wild state. It is necessary that there should be better regulations established, and people who have the knowledge and the implements for gathering things in their season should collect them together, as undoubtedly will gradually be the case. In the meanwhile, I wish the Lords Managers to be courteously inquired of how I can have the opportunity to possess a portion of land, and at my own expense to support myself upon it. For as long as there is no more accommodation to be obtained here from the country people, I would be compelled to order everything from fatherland at great expense, and with much risk and trouble, or else live here upon these poor and hard rations alone, which would badly suit me and my children. We want 10 or 12 farmers with horses, cows, and laborers in proportion to furnish us with bread and fresh butter, milk, and cheese. Having been recalled, Minuit left in the Union in 1632, and was succeeded by Wouter van Twiller of Nieuwkerk, a clerk in the employ of the West India Company, and a relative of the patroon van Rensselaer. He arrived at Fort Amsterdam in the company's ship De Zoetberg, the Salt Mountain, of 280 tons, manned by 52 men, and which carried 20 guns and 104 soldiers, the first military force sent to New Netherland. During his administration, Dominie Everardus Bogaerts, arrived, and also the first schoolmaster Adam Rowlandson. A church was built on Pearl Street, and the block house was succeeded by a fort that was finished in 1635. Von Twiller also bought Pagank, or Nut Island, now Governor's Island, and 2 islands in Hell Gate. Director von Twiller, succeeded by Willem Kieft, who arrived on March 28, 1638 in the Herring, 280 tons and 20 guns. The new director's administration was not at first prosperous, for the West India Company gave up the privileged trade with the Indians, opening this commerce to all the inhabitants of the Dutch provinces, and many colonists were thus drawn to New Netherlands. On the other hand, the English came both from Virginia and New England on account of the good opportunity to plant tobacco here. First, diverse servants whose time had expired, afterwards families, and finally entire colonies having been forced to quit that place in order to enjoy freedom of conscience and to escape from the insupportable government of New England, and because many more commodities were to be obtained here than there, so that in place of 7 boweries and 2 or 3 plantations which were here, 30 boweries were to be seen, as well as cultivated and stocked as in Europe, and 100 plantations which in 2 or 3 years would become regular boweries, for after the tobacco was out of the ground, corn was planted there without ploughing, and the winter was employed preparing new lands. The English colonies had settled under us by patent on equal terms with the others. Each of these was in appearance not less than 100 families strong, exclusive of the colony of Rensselaerswyck, which is prospering, with that of Minders, Mynderts, and Cornelius Mellon, who began first. Also the village of New Amsterdam around the fort, 100 families, so that there was appearance of producing supplies in a year for 14,000 souls without straitening the country, and had there not been a want of laborers or farm servants, twice as much as could be raised. During Kieft's administration, a new stone church was built within the fort, building lots were granted, citizens were allowed a vote in public affairs, and a body of 8 men was selected to advise the governor in the Indian trouble. The Indian War made Kieft unpopular, and he was recalled. He set sail in the Princess in July 1647. The boat suffered shipwreck, and he and the other passengers, including Domine Bogerdus, were drowned. Father Jogues, 1643, says, "For the garrison of the said fort, and of another which they had built still further up against the incursions of the Indians their enemies, there were 60 soldiers. They were beginning to face the gates and bastions with stone. Within the little fort there was a stone church, which was quite large, the house of the governor, whom they call Director General, quite neatly built of brick, the storehouses and barracks. On this island of Manhattan and in its environs, there may well be 400 or 500 men of different sects and nations. The Director General told me that there were men of 18 kinds of languages. They are scattered here and there on the river, above and below, as the beauty and convenience of the spot invited each to settle. Some mechanics, however, who ply their trade are ranged under the fort, all the others being exposed to the incursions of the Indians, who in the year 1643, while I was there, had actually killed some 20 of Hollanders and burnt many houses and barns full of wheat. There is no religious exercise except the Calvinists, and orders are to admit none but Calvinists. However, this is not observed, there being in the colony besides the Calvinists, Catholics, English Puritans, Lutherans, Anabaptists, whom they call Mennonites, etc., etc. When anyone first comes to settle in the country, they lend him horses, cows, etc. They give him provisions, all which he returns as soon as he is at ease. And as to the land, after 10 years he pays to the West India Company the 10th of the produce which he raises. The first comers found lands quite fit for use, formerly cleared by the savages who had fields there. Those who came later have cleared in the woods, which are mostly oak. The soil is good, deer hunting is abundant in the fall, there are some houses built of stone, lime they make of oyster shells, of which there are great heaps, made formerly by the savages who subsist in part by that fishery. Ascending the river to the 43rd degree, you meet the second Dutch settlement when the tide reaches but does not pass. There are 2 things in this settlement which is called Rensselaerswyck, as if to say settlement of Rensselaers, who is a rich Amsterdam merchant. First, a miserable little fort called Fort Orange, built of logs with 4 or 5 pieces of Brutile cannon and as many swivels. This has been reserved and is maintained by the West India Company. This fort was formerly on an island which the river makes. It is now on the mainland towards the Iroquois, a little above the said island. Secondly, a colony sent here by this Rensselaers, who is the patroon. This colony is composed of about 100 persons who reside in some 25 or 30 houses built along the river, as each found convenient. In the principal house lives the patroon's agent. The minister has this apart, in which service is performed. There is also a kind of bailiff here, whom they call the seneschal, who administers justice. Their houses are all merely of boards and thatched. There is as yet no mason work except in the chimneys, the forests furnishing many large pines. They make boards by means of their mills, which they have for the purpose. Montagnais, 1671, thus describes what would be the first view obtained by the settlers of their future home. On the Manhattan's island stands New Amsterdam, 5 miles from the ocean. Ships run up to the harbor there from the sea with one tide. The city hath an earthen fort within the fort, and on the outermost bastion towards the river stand a windmill and a very high staff, on which a flag is hoisted whenever any vessels are seen in Godin's Bay. The church rises with a double roof, between which a square tower looms aloft. On one side is the prison, on the other side of the church the governor's house. Without the walls are the houses mostly built by the Amsterdammers. On the riverside stand the gallows and whipping post. A handsome public tavern adorns the farthest point. Between the fort and this tavern is a row of suitable dwelling houses, among which stands out the warehouses of the West India Company. If you enjoy the content of High Americana, please consider supporting the channel, donating to Patreon linked below. Thank you very much.